Hello, you beautiful degenerates, and welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast presented by Bet365. I'm your host, Roberto Arguello, and I'm excited to break down the 2024 RBC Canadian Open with Spencer Aguilar, whom you can find on Twitter/X at @TOffSports, and also Nick Bretwish, whom you can find on Twitter/X at SticksPicks. That's Sticks with an X. Gentlemen, Hamilton Golf and Country Club hosts this week, which it hasn't done since 2019. Of course, the Canadian Open was not played between 2020 and 2021. So Rory McIlroy was your quote-unquote back-to-back champion in 2019 and 2022. Nick Taylor was the first Canadian to win this event in a long time. I believe it was 69 years. Last year, in epic fashion, as he knocked in a 72-foot eagle putt to knock off Tommy Fleetwood in a playoff. It was so epic that they changed the logo to incorporate his putter toss in that playoff. It was a great moment. Taylor is in rough form this week. He's 70-1, but we've got other best bets to break down for the tournament this week. Spencer, I'll sling it to you first. What is your best bet for the Canadian Open?
I was telling you this off air before we started the show. I don't know how I ended up with so much exposure for this tournament. I normally go to the matchup market. I do have two middling matchups that I'll talk about later in the show that are kind of fringe of where the value was on it. But the best bet for me this week is actually going to be a Bet365 play. Ben Griffin, 60th or better, minus 120.
All right, so Spencer's got the Lone Shark swimming north for the Canadian Open. Nick, who are you backing for your best bet this week?
I'm going to change up what we talked about off air. I'm going to go with Cameron Young, 28-1 on our partner Bet365 in the outright market. Let's do it.
All right, Cam Young looking for his first win on tour. Nick is backing him this week. I don't love the placement betting board this week, so I'm going to do a smaller unit size on this best bet than I've done in recent weeks. But I'm going to go with Chandler Phillips plus 200 for a top 40. Used him as my best bet one time early this season. I think he was 3.5-1 for a top 40 at the Valspar, and he finished tied for third. I like him again this week, but I don't think he'll necessarily tie for third again. So I'll back him in the top 40 market. But before we get into that, Spencer, why are you backing Ben Griffin north of the border this week?
I'll also have Chandler Phillip thoughts as we move across the show, but when you look at Ben Griffin here, I think it's one of those market overcorrections. We've seen him miss 2 straight cuts at the PGA Championship and Charles Schwab Challenge. That's likely where this overcorrection has come into play for a golfer who had posted 6 top 39 finishes before that little bit of a mishap that he's had. I don't necessarily want to analyze that PGA Championship miscut too much. That's a venue where his game was probably not long enough for the venue. You backtrack it to the Charles Schwab miscut. I think that probably tells more of a story since that's an event where he should have found success. But I wasn't necessarily taken aback by his second straight week of not playing the weekend. As I always talk about on this show, I always run my model during an event to feature a projected leaderboard where a player receives their baseline short game stats over their actual production. That didn't necessarily show this massive underachievement, but he landed 72nd in that field when 71 golfers made the weekend. I think that flat production, when you look at the overall grade that he has in my model, does give you that overcorrection that I keep talking about here. My model graded Griffin 7th in recent critical metrics. That would be geared toward Hamilton Golf and Country Club. And then the long-term data, like the past success when he does get to take on a shorter venue. So this was one of the bigger bets that I have made in this Bet365 market. I normally bet them to win a half of unit on it. I bet this one to win a full unit.
All right. I like the Lone Shark there. I think he's a guy who's got a high floor as well. And last time we went into this market, I believe I had Alex Noren top 59 or 59th or better for the PGA Championship, which it never was a sweat. It was in the money the whole time. Hopefully we get the same result this week. Nick, I'll sling it to you. Why are you backing Wake Forest Demon Deacon Cameron Young this week?
Club down Cam, as Spencer and I have been talking about for a while, and Cam Davis. So I think anybody named Cam that's a bomber, we've seemed to prefer them on shorter tracks, which is pretty interesting. But for me, it's overall just the ball striking in that like wedge play to, I guess it's still even like short iron buckets. If Cam Young's hitting from 150 to 175, that's probably still like a pitching wedge to or 9-9 for that guy. But same reason we kind of levitated towards him at the Open Championship at St. Andrews. It's similar yardage buckets. We'll see the approach from. But the importance to hit the fairway here, especially with all the rain coming this week, I think the rough's going to be nasty thick. It graded very similar to me than PGA National, and that's where we saw Cam Young sneak inside the top 5 with gaining strokes, obviously on the putting green, which is going to be very important this week. A lot of 10 to 20-foot putts. That's probably my only concern with him, but he is having the best season of his PGA career tour on the greens. So overall, just a number grab at the end of the day. I had him proper at 22, 23 to 1. So to get 28 to 1 with someone that short, to have that much of an implied probability edge, I'm going to take that every single day. And it was between him and Thigala at the top of the board. I'm going with Cameron Young here.
So Nick is wearing North Carolina colors. He's backing a Wake Forest guy. Spencer's wearing Wake Forest colors. He's backing the North Carolina guy. Now we got that settled. I'm going to get into my best bet. I'm here in Austin, Texas, but I'm backing a Texas A&M Aggie. Chandler Phillips plus 200 for a top 40. I like how he's done on the club down courses. He's a rookie on the PGA Tour, so I'll give him a pass for the T57 at the Sony in his first event as a pro. I think that if you look at some of his statistics, he's had really poor driving weeks in tournaments where he knows that he's going to have to get to 25 under par to compete, and the driving is wide open. That's not the strength of his game, given that he's relatively short, even though he is one of the younger guys. He's just not a big dude. But the strength of his game is that he's really solid on approach, and his short game is pretty strong as well. He's coming off the best week of his career on the PGA Tour. Again, he's rookie around the green last week, tied for 12th at Colonial, which I think it was a good test of where your game is outside of the driver. And he delivered, gaining strokes on approach, putting, and around the green. And off the tee, he wasn't as negative as he normally is, but he still lost strokes. I think that this week, as long as he can find the fairways, and in his last 5 starts on the PGA Tour, he's been above average driving accuracy 4 times. And overall, he's relatively accurate. So I think that he's going to give himself enough chances, and he's strong enough throughout the bag that he can at least get the top 40. I'm not sure that he can win quite yet, but I like his moxie, and we saw him at the Valspar get pretty close to it. So I think this is a type of course that he can excel at. And ultimately, the driver, I think, is what holds him back from winning. But in a relatively weaker field this week, it's an awkward spot where next week is the Memorial after that, and then you have the U.S. Open, and then another signature event after that. So a lot of guys just aren't going to play 4 or 5 weeks in a row. So they're taking this week off, and I think that Chandler Phillips can capitalize on some of that relative lack of depth in the field this week. So we noted earlier on in the show that this is a different golf course that we haven't seen since 2019. So let's figure out how relevant those results were coming up to this week. Of course, there was a renovation done to the course after the tournament ended in 2019. So Spencer, I'll sling it to you. How are you modeling Hamilton Golf and Country Club this week?
So you talked about it, Roberto, but this course has undergone 3 major transformations over the last 100 plus years. You look at 1914 when this was put together, you got renowned English architect Harry Colt to design 18 of what ended up becoming 27 holes at this property that you can find. We saw Robbie Robinson add his flair in 1974 when he included the extra 9 holes that you can find on the property when you traverse the land. Obviously, only 18 of those locations will be used this week for the PGA Tour's return to Hamilton. However, here's the important note here. And this is where I think that your question is kind of the $1 million question for all these tournaments we keep talking about that are pumping millions of dollars trying to restore them into previous iterations and previous viewpoints of what the course actually looked like. So Martin Ebert, performed a restoration that cost $11.5 million. That tried to put it closer to what Colt had envisioned in 1914. This is a venue that we have received very infrequently on the PGA Tour, even before any of this. You talked about it, Roberto, the last iteration of that taking place in 2019. When you look at what happened that year, you got this tight strategic test off the tee. It diminished driving accuracy by over 7% versus a standard tour stop. The one minor change we'll get this go around will be the increase from 6,832 yards to a venue that now stretches a little over 7,000 yards. We're still talking about one of the shorter venues on tour by PGA Tour standards, which is where Rory McIlroy's runaway victory 5 years ago probably doesn't tell the complete story of the challenge that the layout possesses for the field when you do dive into that inferior yardage total. Rory lapped the tournament. You don't win by 7 shots without having everything throughout your bag. He gained with the putter. The driver was a massive weapon for him. He essentially played this venue as a true bomb and gouge where everybody else was being much more conservative and doing your forced layups. So when you look at the score of what actually got included there, I don't want anybody to look at that and see that Rory got into the minus 20 and greater than that, even under par to win that tournament. It was a pretty challenging course, and you're going to get this rebuild of all 27 greens. It's going to include your classic bent grass and POA split. Ebert also added new tees and modernized bunkers that'll help the challenge that the facility had 5 years ago, but do so in a fashion that plays better for today's game regarding positioning. I do want to note how undulation will be a critical component for a green complex that did marginally expand in size to 6,000 feet. That's closer to the PGA Tour average and does have the potential to add a little bit less around the green impact than we got the last go around here. But I don't necessarily want that notion to be minimized of just how challenging and consequential it is for all players to be able to salvage a score when they do miss a green in regulation. That doesn't necessarily give any of the answer about what's going to happen this go around, unfortunately. I decided to play things much closer to what you would expect since we don't have long-term data here to pull from, even without any of the restoration or transformation of the course that we've gotten. That's going to include in my model when I ran it your basic expectations, how someone plays at a short course. How does somebody play at a par 70 venue? I know there's a lot of people in the space talking about when you get tournaments like this, it actually helps in a modeling outlook. I don't understand that answer. I want as much data as we can get. And when the last form of information I can pull from this course is from 2019, and now we've backtracked it and rebuilt it to look more like how it looked in 1914, I don't think it's going to be a massive change that's taken place. Like you have all those new key details that they've added to the mix here, but I don't necessarily want to get caught building a model that looks 100% similar to what we got 5 years ago. But I also don't want to build a model that takes vice versa of that equation. I would rather just keep this simple. I think sometimes people try to convolute the process, and that's coming from somebody who talks about my model every week, and my whole goal is how mad scientists like can I make my build. That's fine when we have years and years worth of data. It's not necessarily the route that I want to go when there's limited data to begin with, and now the changes that have come into the mix. If I can look at this course and see, I know it's short, I know it's a par 70, I know the green complexes, I know the undulation, I can rebuild specifically what some of those proximity ranges will look like, but we don't need to go in and try to overcomplicate the process.
Yeah, I am intrigued to see how the approach buckets turn out, and I've been kind of weighing this question of how much driving accuracy is necessary this week, but also softer conditions I think will play a role. And when we consider that what we've seen recently, where Quail Hollow and Colonial both had redesigns recently, where they have brand new greens. The greens here are a couple years older, given that the renovation was in 2019. And so they're not nearly going to be as firm and fast as those two tournaments that I mentioned recently. So I think that it'll be a lot softer conditions. I think it'll be very amenable to scoring. It's not a very long golf course. And also, in the 5 years that have transpired since the last tournament was played here, the improvements to the ball and the driver are both, I think, significant. And so I think there will be an element of bomb and gouge necessary for players to win the tournament. Obviously, distance is always an asset. And in my upside plays, I definitely want guys who have the ability to bomb it out there and also spike with the putter. So that's something that I'm looking at this week. Approach play, I didn't constrain it into specific buckets as much as I would do on other courses. And also, I think it's relevant to note that this is another par 70, just like Colonial last week, where there are only 2 par 5s, and the par 3s are going to be relatively more challenging than the rest of the golf course. There are also some forced layups. So there's an element of positional golf involved this week, but nonetheless, I still want guys who are going to be able to take advantage of those par 5s and some of the softer conditions, because I think there will be some dog legs and bunkers that the Bombers can carry that others can, and that will be a big separator this week. So even though it's on as many holes, there aren't as many straight par 4s that the Bombers can just take more trouble out of play than usual. I think that it will still be an advantage, and I need some driving upside to be on my top 10s or outright bets this week.
Very quickly before we move on, Roberto, and if Nick wants to add anything to this, I'll kick it over to him after. But the 2 points that you brought up that I at least want to mention and double down on. So you talked about the soft conditions and all the rain that's been in the forecast leading up to this tournament. Look at these long venues, like any of these long venues that we've had when we've gotten soft conditions on this. It has just ramped up the scoring potential. And now you get a short course here. So I am interested to see. I don't necessarily think, and this is maybe where I could end up being wrong. I don't think we get into the total that Rory got to for a winner. That ended up being an outlier sort of a finish like I talked about. My guess would be this is probably somewhere in the 16, 17, 18 under par sort of range there. The other note to that would be most of this distance for a course that really doesn't have very much distance to begin with does come on those par 3s. There are 3 very challenging par 3s that are over 200 yards and a 4th one that is going to still push 180 yards. So all your par 4s for the most part fit into that, for the most part of this answer, at least 0 to 450 yards. Like that's your bucket. You're really not stretching any longer than that. And you're going to really be between 300 to 450 yards. But that's how I ran my model with it for the par 4 scoring. There was a ramped up inclusion or a mix into my model there of how I ran it, trying to find par 4 scorers from that range and people that could salvage their score on the par 3s. And as you talked about, Roberto, I still think the par 5s are one of those separators of where you can produce a total. So weighted scoring for me was a very important metric this week.
Spencer, did you weigh the short to middle irons like heavier than usual?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm doing the same thing, especially like with the added size in greens. I did kind of take off a little bit of around the greens. So I do appreciate you saying that. So I think I'm on the right path if you're on that, but
one of the things I did, just because we do have so many questions around the actual proximity ranges, this was one of the areas where I at least looked at the 2019 tournament, tried to figure out where the proximity was coming, did reproject it for where I thought it would be based off of the new driving distance totals.
Sure.
But I also added in a mix of what I called heightened proximity. So that would be all your short irons. And then it also throws into the mix 200 plus yards. That's going to play for some of your par 5s and your par 3s there.
Yeah, that's all right. I feel like we're on the same path here. And once I go through my outright card, I think it may raise a couple eyebrows, but for the most part, I kind of did exactly what Roberto mentioned with the drivers. Everybody on my card for the most part is still a bomber. I'm not anticipating the Rory situation, but yeah, looking at books right now, winning totals at 18.5 or 19.5.
Interesting.
So depending where you're looking, I think.
I was going to say, I think there will be more golfers because Rory won at 22 under. Nobody else was closer than 15 under. I think there'll be, not very hot take, a lot more golfers lower than 15 under par. Not necessarily a lot, but at least 5. But I think that the winning score will be closer to that 20 under par, depending on how soft the conditions are.
Should be a bunch leaderboard this year too, right? I don't think anybody walks
That's
away
up to
with
Rory,
it.
maybe.
Yeah, I guess it's his to lose, right?
But hey, we never thought that we'd see Davis Riley win by 7 last week, or 5 last week.
Especially when I have a Keegan Bradley ticket. My God. Also, real quick, Roberto, I wanted to text you. What about our boy? We've been talking about him all year long. You used to kick his ass in junior golf, but Mac Meisner, top 5 in it.
I think I beat him like once or twice, but he was also like a good year and a half younger than me. So I
Still
never.
beat him?
The only problem is he stopped playing in my competitions when he was like 15 because he was way better. So I'm intrigued by Mac Meisner. I am going to sprinkle a top 40 bet on him. He's out there at plus 130. And he just really looks like he's coming into his own game here at the PGA Tour level. There's really no weakness in his game. Surprisingly, his driver, I don't think, is as much of a strength as it could be, given that he's a bigger guy and I think could be a little bit longer. Or at least his strokes gained off the tee numbers aren't as strong as I think they could be if he hits a little bit more fairways. But looking at his driving accuracy, in his first 8 starts on the PGA Tour was below average driving accuracy every single week. In his last 5, he's been above average 4 out of 5. And I think that's really helped. And his approach play, he has the 2 best events of his PGA Tour career in his last 2 starts, has been really solid throughout the bag, tying for 13th at Myrtle Beach and then tying for 5th last week at the Charles Schwab Challenge. So I think there's a lot of upside. Or I think Mac Meisner is a solid PGA Tour player, no real weakness in his game. And I think there's more upside than we thought significantly a month ago. So I'm very intrigued by him. I think that this is a good time to kind of strike while the iron is hot, while expectations aren't quite very high. And so I wanted to get that safety market in the top 40 at plus 130. So I did that without Tyson paid in full, but I think you can do that around plus 110 out there as well. So worth looking into. And I'm very intrigued because he's definitely putting it all together. And it looks like since that top 10 at the Valero, tied for 10th, he's really played some solid golf, 4 top 23s in 6 starts, which that T23 is from the Zurich Classic of New Orleans. So read into that what you will with it being a 2-man event.
Yeah.
Quick question before. Oh, go. Sorry, Spencer.
No, Nick, you can go, and then I'll bring up my.
I was just gonna say the guy that graded first before I actually filtered for him in the field for first in expected strokes gained approach for me. Why is he not in the tournament? JT Poston. Is he not a perfect course fit on paper for what we think? I guess obviously the renovations, everything happened, but gonna be a lights out putter on the bent grass and everything. I'm just really upset.
I think he played last week, and so just a situational spot where he wasn't going to play 5 straight weeks.
I wanted him there. My model spit out an arbitrary 28-1, and I was like, for JT Poston, there's no way he opens that short. So that's why he was in the field. It's like, all right, well that makes sense. So I can't do anything with that. I'm still going to bet JT Poston though. If there's any book out there that wants to offer me 40-1 on Poston this week, I'll take it.
It's like we've talked about, Nick, on every show that we've done together. It's the scheduling has been so complicated for some of these golfers, and Poston at these club down shorter courses. I talked about it last week. He was on my outright card. He didn't quite obviously get the victory out of it, but a very good performance nonetheless.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's just some of these golfers, the statistical data that they're actually providing, I think it's skewed in a lot of ways with it, just because the courses are not what they would typically be playing when they've qualified for anything that's elevated or major championship.
Yeah, it looks like the only time he's been out to Canada was 2022 from the looks of it. Didn't go in 2019 when it was here, but I don't know if I'm his coach, I'd be like, I think this is he was back there in 2018, but yeah, I don't know. Just graded out as the best iron course fit player for me and isn't in the field, so that's fun.
I'll move us into the outright card, Roberto, because it's a kind of a good segue with the Meisner conversation that we were having. There were about 4 or 5 extremely deep long shot sort of bets that my model liked this week. But one of the things when I built my math, and this is where it's complicated, when my model loves the top of the board, it doesn't mean that there's necessarily going to be value in that section, but there is this connection of how my math views that portion of the slate and then the correlation with how much exposure I want to take on for the week. So that either means that I get very aggressive at the top of the board where there is value, or I want to take a bunch of long shots. And you look at this tournament, you get Rory, Fleetwood, Theegala, Burns, Noren. Those were all answers that my model really liked. It didn't necessarily like every single one of those names for the price that you had to pay, but there was increased win equity from what I would normally want to see in that position. there were 4 or 5 golfers, Meisner being one of them. I thought when things opened on Monday, you could argue that he may have been the best bet on the board. That got crushed. That number moved quickly. The other name would be your guy, Roberto, Chandler Phillips, where I agree that there could be an answer where potentially this isn't going to be the market that you want to bet him in. Maybe it's a top 40. I took him a top 20 at plus 550. Maybe those are the better markets, but I ended up throwing a dart on Chandler Phillips. I also took Sahith Theegala at 22 to 1. I wanted to get to either Fleetwood, Theegala, or Burns on my card. Maybe this is where I'm a little bit too cautious in my outright approach, that I didn't take more than just one of these names. I didn't want to play it more aggressively than what I ended up doing. I tend to think that the narrative around this tournament leads to a much better in-tournament betting card, where I only have a half unit in play right now, and it's going to give me the ability to add any of those high-end options that I've talked about. When I geared my model toward Hamilton Golf and Country Club, Theegala graded 3rd for weighted scoring. He also graded 3rd for projected approach and putting, and he also landed 3rd for recent strokes gained total when you look specifically for Hamilton. I don't think there's a massive difference between him and Fleetwood. I went with Theegala when this opened because of the minor price boost that you could get here at 22. That number has fallen more into the 20 to 1 range now, and we've seen Fleetwood go from, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Roberto. I last checked earlier this morning, but I think you might still be able to find a 18 to 1 on Fleetwood, but even that number almost everywhere has been on the move also. So that was just a price grab between the two of them there. And then the option that I bet that I thought was the best wager on the board when everything opened, and I talked about this on the Action Network Best Bets column. You want to say that Rory, Fleetwood, Theegala are the favorites. That is completely fine by me. That's what my model has also. It's more of that secondary range of names with Burns, Noren, everybody else there, where the prices are close to being accurate. But there was a golfer in Tom Kim, and unfortunately, that's another situation where it's been a runaway train that we've gotten. That number has moved. It opened at 50. I got it at 45. It's now into the mid to low 30s from what we've gotten. But I think this was just a price error that the books had put up. You're never really in these positions to where Tom Kim should be double the price of names, where if you compare Kim versus Noren and Burns, the upside portions of my model still likes Kim more than it likes the other two. Thought it was a really big mistake that books made to begin this week, and there's a reason why that was corrected as quickly as it was. And this is not square money that's entered the market. This is legitimate sharp money that has pushed this price down. I would argue that 28 to 1 is what I had being the proper going rate, which is very similar for what I would say with Alex Noren and very similar with what I'd say for Sam Burns. It's just even still with that movement that we've seen, Tom Kim would technically still be a value. Although the one thing I want to note on that, I hate coming on this show and trying to catch a number and tell everybody to catch a number that's already moved so precipitously from where it started. But 28 to 1 would be the proper going rate for whatever that's worth.
I feel like you'd still want to advise, loosely advise taking, there's 35s out there still in the marketplace for time.
I think it's a good price.
Yeah,
there's still value.
Yeah. You got
35 to 1 is available for Tom Kim on Bet365, our sponsor, and also Fleetwood is available at 19 to 1 at Bet365 as well.
We're doing the Fleetwood thing. I don't have room for it, but is there a better course fit for Tommy Fleetwood than this one? I mean, RBC Heritage.
I was going to say a course like last week for Heritage.
Man, he grades so well. It's got to happen, right? I don't know. I think he's going to be my one and done if I still have him.
That's bad news for me. I won't be playing catch up, I guess. We'll get to that in the one and done. I'm playing a different game at this point.
That's fair.
I'll hop into my outright card. I got started with Sam Burns. I will note that Theegala is the first person who missed my card. Like Spencer, I kind of wanted to leave room I definitely wanted to leave room for in-tournament betting, just with there being a relative unknown given the golf course. So I have Sam Burns at 30-1 as the shortest golfer on my outright card. I love the upside that he has off of the tee and with the putter. And also, I like that he's been converting his looks into birdies. So far this season, he's fourth in birdie or better percentage overall, fourth in birdie or better conversion percentage. Conversion percentage is amount of birdies made divided by greens and regulation. So when he's on a green, he gives himself a chance, or he converts on his chances, but also he's converting in general too. And also, it's not like he's just doing this on the par fives. He's on the top 36 on tour in birdie or better percentage on all three of par threes, par fours, and par fives. So I like that. I'm always questioning whether it's more important or less important to play the par fives well when there are two par five, just because you need to capitalize on both of those opportunities, whereas there just are only two opportunities. So I still think it's important for those par fives, one on each side here at Hamilton. I also like that he's been playing better on approach. Last year, big down year for him in terms of approach play, but he's been much more consistent this season, and he's gained strokes on approach in 8 of his last 9 tournaments. So I really like that he is trending in that direction. We're getting a bit of a discount, I believe, because he had his worst putting week in 2 years at the PGA Championship. It was only 2 rounds, but lost over 5 strokes there. I am not too worried about that. I'm willing to write it off as an outlier, and I like just the upside for him. He hasn't been in contention very recently this year, but he had a run of 3 or 4 straight top 10s between the American Express and the Genesis Invitational. So we know that he has upside. And of course, he's won several times on the PGA Tour. So I like that he's a closer. Moving down the card, I like Akshay Bhatia this week. He has been too outstanding on approach to ignore, where he's gained over 1.75 strokes per round on approach in 4 of his last 7 tournaments. That right there was enough upside for me to say yes at this number in this field. I love Akshay's upside, and if he needs to hit fairways, he showed us at the Valero Texas Open on what is a significantly longer golf course than here, but one where you can't be too wide off the tee, that he can get it done off the tee with his driver. He's not exceptionally long, but he's long enough that he can make it work, especially if there end up being some firmer conditions where there's some rollout, but I'm not anticipating that this week. And then, so he's the shortest guy I have on my card, but I got 2 other bombers. I got Davis Thompson, whose accuracy off the tee has been lacking this year up until his last 3 starts. And as a result, 3 of his 4 best strokes gained off the tee weeks this season have been in the last 4 weeks. He's above average at everything, but not elite at anything. And I believe that this uptick off the tee is what sets him over the edge in terms of being able to put it together. And as we saw at the American Express last year, on a course where you need to hit fairways or on a course where you just need to make birdies, it's going to be a birdie fest. I like Davis Thompson's ability to go low. Moving on to my lone Canadian on the card, I got Taylor Pendrith at 65-1. His driver is a weapon again after shoulder surgery, or after a shoulder injury. I shouldn't say surgery. 2 of his 3 best off the tee tournaments this season have come in his last 3 starts, which, if you remember back at the end of the 2022 season, driver was a huge asset for him. He made the President's Cup team. I think that he is coming back into the form of being a top 50 or so golfer in the world, but he's not being priced as such. I know that his numbers don't look great overall, but I think a lot of that is skewed because of the injury. And now look at his recent results. He's done a lot better than the prior sample size of the year since the injury happened at Torrey Pines. One other thing to note for him, the putter is a big asset. He's gained strokes putting in 10 of his last 12 tournaments, and he has some upside there as well. So if he plays well on approach, which, by the way, when he won at the CJ Cup Byron Nelson a couple weeks ago, didn't even gain strokes on approach. So the fact that he has such upside with both his driver and his putter, if he just plays well on approach, he can contend. And if he has a great week on approach, which we haven't necessarily seen this season, but if he does, I know it's possible, he could win this by a couple shots. So I like that all these guys have the upside, I think, to win by a couple shots this week. I don't have anybody lower than 65-1 on my card right now, but I want to save room for in-tournament betting.
It was a really big, just very quickly, Roberto, it's a very big group. And one of the things I've been doing in my model, and I've been putting it into my article, that I write over at Roto Bowler is I like to look at the categories that I run and the players that grade inside of the top 60 of the field for the metrics that I ended up looking at. And all four names that you talked about were four of the 15 who landed in that mix. Three that I talked about were three of the other ones there. So we have 7 of the 15 based off of that list. And when I've been running that so far this year, not every single go around, Davis Riley didn't fit it last week, but a lot of the winners have landed in that very consistent range of that mix. So I think between your card and my card, and we'll see what Nick has on tap for us right now, there's a lot to like about like pretty much every wager that you made were that next tier of options that I highly considered. And even if it doesn't come from an outright wager, I think that there's portions of the market to where you can consider Davis Thompson in a matchup because of the safety that's in my model. I think Akshay is a really nice upside choice if you want to bet him as a top 10 and anything of that nature. There's a lot of intriguing options on this board, though.
Yeah, I thought there were quite a few guys in that 40 to 80 to 1 range who are playing some of the best golf of their lives right now, who are very intriguing and maybe just were a little bit higher than I would have liked them to be. For example, Keith Mitchell, who is absolutely flushing the ball but can't putt. I wanted to err more toward the side of good putters than putters whom I have questions about their upside. All right.
Yeah, I did.
You've heard Spencer's picks. You've heard mine. Nick, who you got for your Sticks picks this week?
Well, he's basically hit all of mine. So I did go with Thigala. I had room for one more on the card at the top of the board. Cameron Young started my card at 28 to 1. Thigala at 22 to 1. So I'm going to ride in Spencer there. You talked about Akshay Bhatia. I felt like how Spencer talked about Tom Kim is kind of how I felt about Akshay. I had Akshay at 42 to 1. So to see 50 pretty much everywhere was pretty intriguing to me. Obviously, he's going through a lot. Was super close to Grayson Murray. I don't know if that's good or bad for his game, but he's going to go out there. Maybe we get a very decorated performance out of him. I think he's one of the highest upside type of guys in the field. Davis Thompson. It's so awesome to see a guy that we've been talking about for I don't know a year and a half now, guys. Like we've been believing in his game, just like I've been believing in Mac Meisner's game since Roberto whooped his ass 15 years ago. 55 to 1 in a pretty strong field for Davis Thompson just shows you like how much bookmakers respect this game. I think Spencer said it best. The matchup's probably like the second type of exposure I was looking for with Davis Thompson, just because he does grade so safe, and you're going to get him against guys like EVR, Hadwin that have some volatility. So I love that. The only two guys that I have that you guys did not mention is Daniel Berger on Bet365 at 90 to 1. Obviously, if I'm taking Cameron Young and Thigala, I need to go down the board a bit to get some more value. For Berger, like he's still grades. It's longer sample size that's kind of weighted in there, but he grades as one of the best wedge players to short iron fairway finders in the field. Obviously, his putting this year has been horrendous, but historically, he's one of the best putters on the PGA Tour in my lifetime of watching the game. So if I just have to bet on the come that his putter's coming back to life, the approach game started to, be the Daniel Berger that we know. He's hitting fairways. I just think 90 to 1's a number grab I couldn't pass up. And for some reason, my model loves Gary Woodland. I did not expect him to be a good course fit, but the long par threes, he grades as a top 5, expected like proximity for that. And the putter for Gary Woodland is actually coming around a little bit. I believe it is 3 straight rounds that he has scored with the putter. 4, not counting the Zurich. So RBC Heritage, he gained strokes putting. Wells Fargo Championship, he was lights out putting. Obviously, they were on the green, and ball striking overall wasn't fantastic. PGA Championship, he gained strokes putting in what was a putting contest. So that's kind of interesting to see. And then Charles Schwab again last week. So something's going on with his putting, and I know the ball striking upside is there for 150 to 1. Like Gary Woodland can certainly finish dead last or miss a cut. I understand that, but my numbers had him at like 105, so 45 points of value again, but very minimal percentile when we're going that far down the board. But I'm going to ride it. Gary Woodland's a guy I want to root for anyway, so that's a little bit of a heart play. But other than that, yeah, I'm with you guys on Thiegs. I'm with you on Akshay, and I'm with you on Davis Thompson.
I like the Woodland play. I hadn't looked into him a lot, but there's 4 straight tournaments, as you noted, that he's gained strokes with the putter after being a huge negative. So those are the kinds of swings that can be really valuable to try to capitalize on before the markets completely react. So I think that maybe a first round leader or a top 10
That's
for the whole
probably
tournament
the better way to
are
go.
also
Yeah,
very
I
intriguing.
don't think he'll actually close 4 rounds, but I think maybe first round leader, top 10 is probably a better bet for Woodland. You're definitely dead on there.
Just the around the green game makes me a little hesitant, but at 150 to 1, I'm intrigued. I also wanted to note that Daniel Berger, in his 7 prior years on the PGA Tour, of course, he wasn't playing in 2023 because he took off from the U.S. Open in 2022 all the way to the beginning of 2024 with that back injury. But in the 7 seasons prior to this year on the PGA Tour, he's gained strokes putting every single year. And when you got a back injury, it's hard to be hunched over, putting and chipping all day long. And so It makes sense that this is the last part of his game to come back. Whereas you have, for example, other more high profile injuries like Tiger with the legs and everything where he can only chip and putt. So it's a different way of coming back from it. He is going to become a good putter at some point, and I'd rather be on Nick's side where you're backing him before the turn comes and then he's priced out of everything. So I'm intrigued by Daniel Berger. I haven't bet him this week. I highly considered him at 90 to 1 among the guys outside of Thigala. He was the first person who missed my card. So I'm looking hard at Daniel Berger. I might play him for a top 10 or top 20 just because there is the other downside of the short game, which hasn't been an asset at all this year. But I think that the ball striking, which has been an asset both off the tee and on approach, is real. And he's super accurate off the tee. So if this is a week where you need to be hitting fairways, he could be a great fit. And also, we're not going to have too many other chances to bet him because he's not into the signature events, I don't think. So last chance to see him for a little while.
Last question I had for you. You mentioned these guys in the 40s that are playing some of the best golf in years. Obviously, Keith Mitchell. But what about M. Scott? I had a big edge on him. Not a big edge. Obviously, I would have taken it, but I kind of ran out of room, especially when I took Akshay. I had a larger edge on Akshay than I did M. Scott, but M. Scott checked the box as someone I should probably be looking at.
I'm very intrigued by Adam Scott. I was looking hard at him minus 130 over Eric Van Rooyen. I
love that play. Yeah.
I just don't love the minus 130. If it was minus 120, I'd already have a ticket.
Roberto,
I also was intrigued at 38.5. Better than 30.5. Sorry, go ahead, Spencer.
No, I was just going to say it was minus 120. I think I might have moved the market on that one.
Okay. Is that already in the article?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I didn't know that one.
Okay, so Spencer likes Adam Scott too.
Spencer.
Son of a bitch.
All right.
Market.
Yeah. Here's the thing though with I like Adam Scott also. He's been a player for the last 2 months that has been consistently being pushed up my model, and we haven't necessarily got a lot of those high-end finishes. We got the best result that we did from him last week, where I thought the game looked good, and the statistics ended up trending in the right direction there. I bet him at minus 120 over Van Rooyen, as I talked about. It's 130 now. I do think, though, that Davis Thompson, Keith Mitchell, all those names that we've discussed, if you've already missed that movement, I like both of those two options also against Van Rooyen. Van Rooyen has a little bit more upside in my model than I typically would want to take on for one of these opponents. He ended up climbing to 5th in my sheet in recent production when I weighed it towards Hamilton. That's normally not the golfer I'm looking to take on when the stats are trending in that direction, but some of those short par 70 outputs that I got from him in my sheet were highly troublesome. So I like taking Adam Scott in a matchup there, and unfortunately, outside of that matchup, if you look at every other opponent that he has in the space, whether it's McNeely or Cameron Young and whoever else is out there, these were all golfers that I liked, and I couldn't find the matchup in any of those spots with Scott, but I think there's a pretty high floor here. Maybe this is more of an in-tournament answer for anybody who's missed that price on Van Rooyen, because I agree. I think at 130, we're starting to push the envelope a little bit there, but Scott's an intriguing play.
Yeah, other matchups are Cameron Young, McNeely, Corey Connors, Sam Burns, Keith Mitchell. Like, okay, all guys that we already touched on this for the most part. We didn't mention Corey Connors, but, who's safer than Corey Connors? That guy's the best ball striker on the planet by a mile right now.
Yeah, the safety portions of my model, Connors loses a lot of the upside because of the putter, but all the safety numbers that you'd want to see for a matchup, there's really no reason to try to take him on. And that's probably the worst player, maybe him or McNeely, of all the golfers that you named in my model. And these are all still top 20 plays. And when I ran them for safety, a lot of these are top 10 options. So there was really one Adam Scott matchup that made sense. And that's the one that moved of all of them.
I'll say Corey Connors. Is he the Canadian Siwoo Kim? Just ball striking fiend who difference in short game. Corey Connors, poor short game. Siwoo Kim, very strong short game. But the moral of the story is both of them very safe from tee to green relatively, but the putter is just a disaster. Yeah. Let's move on into our other placement market bets, matchups, anything else you have on the card. Spencer, empty the clip for us.
So I talked about the Adam Scott play over Van Rooyen. That's moved. If you want to look at Davis Thompson or Mitchell over them or over Van Rooyen, I think that's certainly something that you can consider. I took KH Lee minus 115 over Sam Stevens. If I'm going to come on the show and talk about all the negatives or positives, whichever way you want to look at it, of me moving a number one way, this actually moved in the other direction. I got it at minus 120. It's dropped to minus 115 now. It's still there as of this recording. There's so much that my model disliked about Stevens. He's lost with his irons in 7 straight starts, averaged negative 2.62 shots with his approach during that run. When we add that to the questionable past form, when you give him a short par 70 course, it's the same answer I was talking about for Van Rooyen. This did feel like a spot where the form might finally catch up to him. And then the only other play I have on my card would be Chandler Phillips top 20 at plus 550. I decided to play this more aggressively than you, Roberto, just because it is an extremely boom or bust profile from him of what we've gotten. I think at 2-1, you can still consider it for a top 40, and there's a clear chance here that he lands 31st place and you win the bet and I don't. I was just looking for a way to take on a little bit less exposure, but, there's an argument that if you wanted to elevator this bet up, I think you can probably push it up pretty high and you could start at a top 40 in reality.
Awesome. Hopefully he just wins the whole thing and I get a good live number and we cash everything. Yeah. Nick, who else do you have on the card?
Another gross guy. For some reason, it's taking these bombers with wedge and long iron play. Ryan Fox top 20 at plus 350. I don't think I've ever bet Ryan Fox a day in my life or rostered him in DFS, but here we are. I had that number at plus 310, so 40 points of value on one of the most volatile golfers in the field.
This is great news for my fantasy team. I play him every week because I don't have an alternate choice to do, and I never want to have him in, so I will gladly play him here.
I'm going to need better than T32, but T20, I'll take it. Ryan Fox. Going with the math here. Don't know how it's pushing him out, but go get him. Usually these weird ones work. The ones that I hate, the plays I'm uncomfortable with, like the Jordan Smith at the PGA, like stuff just seems to work out when I do not like the play. So Ryan Fox, go get him, kid.
That's sports betting in a nutshell. It's every one of those NFL bets that's the right side is the one where you can't actually watch the game and you just check in afterwards to see if you've won the wager or not.
Yeah, like the Commanders laying 3 at home against Dallas or something early next year. Yeah. Like that makes no sense. Just we'll take it. Yeah.
All right, fellas. I think I've noted pretty much all the plays on my card. We talked about Meissner already, and then I actually just saw this. I had Daniel Berger 52nd or better minus 120 as my other bet that we hadn't discussed. So I'm looking at that, maybe a top 40. I'm very intrigued by Berger, maybe even top 20 could be there. So I think there's a chance for a small ladder play on him, depending on, because I think that everything is hinging upon his short game and putting. And I think more so putting this week. So I will be playing Daniel Berger in some capacity. I don't want to leave the juice at minus 120. So maybe I'll do a top 20 and top 40 ladder for him this week, since I like that Nick is bullish on him as well. And with that note, let's move to our one and done conversation. I went with the block the rest of the field, and it worked relatively because we had 5 or 6 guys on Harris English. All 5 of us made $0 last week because he missed the cut. So a lot of people didn't make ground on me because of him, but a lot of other people got top 10 finishes. So I'm still in the lead, but I don't like that there are a handful of other golfers or other people in the pool who are within striking distance. This week, I'm going with a guy who's for sure going to be top 30, Alex Noren. I don't know if he's going to win. Feels like I've done a nice job betting some of the players who I don't love their odds, but I like their chances of playing well. I'm going to go back to Noren this week. Feels like the best chance to bet him the rest of the season. He's playing extremely consistent golf, even though he hasn't really been in contention outside of the CJ Cup Byron Nelson. So give me him on a relatively easier golf course where the putter can be an asset, and I'll ride his consistent iron play to a 15th place finish this week. Spencer, who you got for one and done this week?
I think I've left about $10 million on the table of picks I've given on the show and then not actually put into the contest. I gave Sepp Straka out last week on the show, pivoted to Adam Scott. It was a very minor difference on that one compared to some of those other ones, like a Wyndham Clark at Pebble Beach, for example. But to me, there's a handful of options to consider here. The first one would probably be if you're front running a contest, Alex Noren makes a lot of sense. I'm in a weird spot because the two players outside of Tom Kim, that might be the one where I pivot to Tom Kim and we go that direction with it. But I'm playing a different contest, as I noted. I want to be introduced in this from now on rather than last place. I want to be introduced as the person in first place for most cashes so far this season, which gets me 5% of the pool, which doesn't even get me my money back. But first place
your
is
score
first
to
place.
par is filthy. You're at minus 136, 11 better than anybody. And Roberto and I haven't even topped or got lower than 80 yet. So you got nothing to show for it.
No, I don't make any money in these contests. It's a bunch of 23rd place finishes where there's been decent production, but just never quite puts it together. The three options, and it will be one of these three names, I can virtually guarantee it. It'll be Tom Kim, it'll be Tommy Fleetwood, or it'll be Sahith Theegala.
I'm taking Fleetwood.
Then it'll be, I don't know. I might need my made caches. It might be Theegala because I still think they're very close based off of that, and it still allows me to pivot away from Nick.
I don't have either of those guys available, so I guarantee you I won't be picking them. Also wanted to note that in true Spencer fashion, I was between Colin Morikawa, who finished in the top 5 last week, and Harris English, and I completely played myself. So, Unfortunate, but on to the next. Want to take this moment to give a reminder that this podcast is presented by Bet365, and Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day, they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays, and they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problems? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. All right, gentlemen, let's do a brief rapid fire. I wanted to go through the Canadians this week because it's the Canadian Open. Why not? Everybody wants to bet on the Canadians. I also was intrigued if you guys had any other bets that you considered for Canadians this week. But other than that, let's go to rapid fire of the Canadians. If you have any bets that you're considering for the Canadians, let me know. First off, we got Corey Connors, Mackenzie Hughes, Adam Hadwin. Let's look at the low Canadian market. Corey Connors plus 280, Mackenzie Hughes plus 450, Adam Hadwin's plus 600, Nick Taylor's plus 750, Taylor Pendrith plus 750, Adam Stenson plus 750, Ben Silverman is 14-1. Everybody else does not have a full PGA Tour card, or if they do, they're playing very poorly. Nobody else is within 20-1 to win low Canadian. So among those guys, Connors, Hughes, Hadwin, Taylor Pendrith, Svensson, and Silverman. Anybody that catches your eye, Spencer?
It's a nice price on Pendrith. I hate what the market is doing on him right now. He's a massive underdog to every single person. When I incorporate that into my model, I assume Pendrith is going to move in the wrong direction. I guess the question there is how far does he actually move from some of these top 15 outputs that I have for him? My math liked Adam Hadwin. there might be some like scar tissue that comes into play with Hadwin after getting tackled. That's one of the most memorable moments of last year, of him just getting completely taken out by the security guard there. But from an upside number, Hadwin, I think, is a very interesting choice.
Nick, any thoughts on the Canadians?
I was going to go Hadwin just solely off the putter, but if not, I like the way Adam Svensson's playing, but I've never gotten that guy right a day in my life. So I'll go with Hadwin. I can't do the Svensson thing again. Ben Silverman, though, was Spencer's boy. What tournament was that when you had him in the placement market? He came through for us. PGA National?
I think it was. Maybe was it Houston?
I remember not hearing his name for years.
I remember it hit. That's all that matters.
It did hit.
I don't think it was Houston. It was something.
I think it was doing PGA National because I
think you're correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So and that's a course comp I kind of have here. So I don't mind that guy, but I don't have any good data on him. So I'll go with Adam Hadwin, but honorable mention Svensson.
Silverman graded inside the top 45 for me this week with upside numbers that were kind of intriguing.
Yeah, it was definitely PGA National because I remember he was inside the top 10 at one point. And I was like, dude, what the hell is Spencer doing? He's a psychopath. That's just always right. And there he was. Good ticket nonetheless. So
I'm intrigued by this market because the favorite Corey Connors can't do anything within 50 yards of the green relatively. So I think that there is reason to back others who have upside. Svensson, I think, profiles somewhat similarly to Corey Connors. He's not as long as Connors off the tee, but he hits the ball super straight. There's no curve on his irons. It was fun last week covering the Charles Schwab Challenge, and we would have the par threes on our featured holes, and we'd have the TrackMan helping us out with the tracing, and it would show the feet of curve on the shots, and Svensson's were 5 feet or fewer just about every time. Dude hits absolute lasers. I think that this is a good golf course for him where his driver is also super straight, even though he's not very long. He'll be in the fairways. I think that his best conditions will be firm and fast, maybe more on a southern golf course where the Bermuda rough is a bigger penalty. But I like Svensson a lot. I was intrigued to potentially back him outright, but I saw he was 70-1. Didn't love that price. If he was closer to 100-1, I would have jumped in. I'd like to back him. I think that perhaps in a matchup play might be the better way to do it. The putter has been a big liability for him, but he's shown some signs of life recently. So if you want to back Svensson, I think you can do it a little bit more conservatively, but I don't hate the upside for him, especially on a shorter golf course where it's going to need to be more positional. So maybe if we see that the golf course is playing like that on Thursday, I'll add him in some fashion later on this week. But this is somebody I've got my eyes out for because the putter has just been such a big red flag that eventually he's going to putt better. I'm just not sure how safe he is yet.
Roberto, let me ask you this. Yeah. Let me ask you this question because you talked about a matchup with Svensson, and I got very close to making this wager, and I ended up not going in this route because there was a little bit too much boom or bust in the profile, and this might be a terrible thing for me to ask you, but I need your opinion on this because you're probably the best person to ask. Svensson versus Kevin Yu.
I knew.
Do you have a take?
Oh man, these guys are very similar profiles. I mean,
they are. That was one of the problems of why I ended up not going in that route. There was.
Sorry, go ahead, Spencer.
I was just going to say there is a boom or bust potential to both of those two options, and my model very much disliked Kevin Yu more so than with Svensson, but I don't know. My math loved it. There were some red flags though that worried me.
Yeah, Kevin Yu is longer, and so I think he can win on more golf courses, and I think that the length off the tee gives him some more upside because of that. But neither of them can putt, and I would argue that Svensson is probably even a little bit better around the green I think it's pretty easy to say that Svensson is a little better around the green than Yu. So I think Svensson is safer, but Yu has more upside. Ultimately, I wouldn't want to back one against the other this week.
That's the general assessment that I came down to with also. If Yu makes the cut, he's the one that's more likely to top 10 this tournament. And the ball striking looks great. Some of the other stuff with the short game or where the concerns came into play. I decided not to go down that direction. I did highly consider it, though.
We're going to hear about a Kevin Yu or a Siwoo Kim or an Adam Svensson putter change in the near future, or Daniel Berger, and we're going to be betting them aggressively. But until then, they're more on my to monitor list that I'm excited about, but I'm not going to jump in too quickly on necessarily. Although we are backing Berger this week. Gentlemen, where can we find your work this week? Starting with you, Nick.
Action Network, Best Bets article, and then at Better Golf Pod. I'm sure Spencer and I will get to some sort of DFS breakdown sometime tomorrow, maybe tomorrow night before the field closes and all the contests are full. So we'll be the last to market for information for you guys before everything tees off on Thursday.
All right. Excited to hear that. Spencer, where can we find your work this week?
You can find me on Twitter at TOffSports. You can get all my in-tournament content here at Action Network. We'll run through the matchup board. You can also get my model over at Rotoballer.
Awesome. Especially in a week where there are so many unknowns. I thought it was really cool to check out the model this week, as I do every week. So be sure to check it out. Of course, you can weigh things differently. And if you have a take on how the course is going to play, or you see something going on in real time, you can always adjust it. So once again, Spencer, you noted the baseline putting and short game that you can adjust once the tournament is already in progress. Great way to analyze and look at potential bets for the weekend. So you can find me on Twitter at RobertoA213. You can find me on the Action app and on the Action Network website, app, YouTube. Follow us. Check us out. We've got great content coming up this week. I know Colin Wilson is going nuts with NCAA baseball starting its postseason this weekend. The Longhorns are in College Station with the best player in the regional being a transfer from Stanford for Texas A&M, Braden Montgomery. So sad. You can find our NBA best bets. The guys have been killing it. We've got our WNBA podcast that just started a couple weeks ago for the new WNBA season. Check it out. The lines there are much more soft compared to the NBA. So tons of value out there and great stuff going on throughout the Action Network. So be sure to check out all our content, whether it's online, on YouTube, or here in podcast version as well. I want to give a big thanks to everybody who makes this podcast possible, starting with you, the listeners, and of course, our producers, Noah Niederhofer, Matt Mitchell, and David Payne for all the help that they give us every single week. And without any further ado, thanks to everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next week at Muirfield Village.